Ausstellung von Sabine Hornig und Tamuna Chabashvili, Patterns of Insecurity. Ich würde euch bitten, euch vorzustellen einfach.
Okay, so we introduce ourselves. So I'm Sabine Hornig, I'm based in Berlin and invited Tamuna Chabashvili and Nina Chkareuli-Mdivani to come here and to do the exhibition, and Stephanie provide the space. I'm an artist, and shall I introduce the other ones also?
No.
Okay.
Yeah. So my name is Tamuna Chabashvili. I'm a visual artist, currently more based in Tbilisi rather than Amsterdam, but basically I have practices in both countries, in Netherlands and Georgia. And we met with Sabine last year, so that's through architecture biennial and also a curator. Yeah? So that's how we know each other.
Hi, my name is Nina Chkareuli-Mdivani. I'm a Tbilisi-born, New York-based curator and writer, and I was invited kind of by Sabine and Tamuna to come and moderate this artist talk, and also to kind of to have a conversation about this very important topic that we are facing as a society, the insecurity, the global insecurity in different contexts and in the practices of these two visual artists. So, and I think the good place for us to start this conversation is to talk about the title. So where exactly it comes from, what prompted this specific concept for the show, and how it evolved over time.
Yeah,
Okay, please.
Yeah, I think it's your title, isn't it?
The title is mine, but the first...
so we met in Tbilisi. I was actually invited by Architecture Biennial Tbilisi to join in 2022, and we wanted to do a project then already, but through all the circumstances of the Ukraine and large war and everything was a bit delayed, and then everybody was paralyzed in Tbilisi, and we thought we'd do it in 23 then. And then Architecture Biennial was actually invited to participate in Venice, in the Architecture Biennial in Venice, and so they were really busy. And then but meanwhile I had already met Tamuna in Tbilisi, because I went there to look at the Architecture Biennial in 22, and we saw that we have so much in common connecting parts in terms of our work. Like both work with transparent images or photographs also, not here now, not much, but transparent layers of memory and history, and also like spatial interventions that deal with our notion of space in terms of political sense, also like interactions with the space and so on.
And also, let's also mention Nina Chkareuli-Mdivani, who was one of the originators of the concept.
Nina Chkareuli-Mdivani
brought you together.
Yeah, I know since 20 years from New York. She had a gallery once in New York when I was there, and she always told me about Tbilisi, and then she returned to Georgia and runs the art school now, where also Tamuna is teaching. And then she gave the tip to Architecture Biennial to invite me, and so and when we decided to do an independent exhibition in Tbilisi, we brought her back in again. So she runs Kunsthalle Tbilisi also. She's a very active person connecting Tbilisi with the outside world, and so she has been very important in the back. Then she couldn't come here, so we did the show in Tbilisi last year,
which we also want to talk about
later. Yeah, she couldn't come here, and then Nina came on her part. Yeah.
And I think regarding the topic, when Sabine was invited by the Architecture Biennial, the topic of the Architecture Biennial was the temporality, and the idea of temporality in different senses, like the living spaces, the political conditions, and also the IDPs in Georgia that have like housing problems and issues that was created due to these temporary situations. They were like given those houses that they would kind of enter temporarily, but then this temporality turned into 30 years. So in a way they had a very beautiful topic. And since Sabine's invitation was through that topic. Somehow we decided to use that as our starting point, and we had this exchange. And of course, the idea, the topic of borders also came with it, because it had also to do with like what happened beyond basically all the borders and the occupied territories, and how people are always affected. And how actually they embody this whole experience, which is almost like invisible, but they embody this experience. And in a way, that was also something that interests me in relation to this topic. And then there was this idea to do the exhibition in Tbilisi, which is almost like a little bit like self-initiated, but since we both have this how to say, a little bit approach of doing things ourselves.
Right.
So it was I took also the initiative. I thought, okay, since we met, why don't we celebrate that? Not to miss the point, because maybe we would have a collaboration in 2024, but maybe we don't know what's going to happen in Georgia in 2024. So it was a good moment.
And it's interesting that we didn't know back then what was going to happen this time.
Yes, but what I knew very much, and that's the time when we met, was actually the invasion, the full-scale invasion in Ukraine, which in a way paralyzed everyone in Georgia. And I think that returning back to this question of the title, which came also through the title of my work, was very much dealing with my own experience as a person, as a visual artist, as a female, as someone who grew up during the perestroika and then somehow experienced very much of this whole 90s situation of Georgia, and then also had to immigrate to Europe and then again come back to Georgia. So in a way, all that suddenly was kind of pushed to this, yes, and all this trauma started to appear. And of course, everyone thought that, okay, next will be Georgia to be attacked. In the very, very beginning, it was like after the February. And so when we started to talk about all those topics and the political situation, for me, everything was very blurred, and I couldn't really hold on anything. And that was one of the topics for me, which was that, in a way, Georgia and everyone who has some experience of being brought up in Georgia or has anything to do with Georgia in the long term, this idea of temporality, that things can change any time, it's very important. So in a way, it also very much is the topic of my work in terms of how things can be adjusted or readjusted all the time, and what would be the structure to hang on, And it's, in a way, it's yourself.
In a way, it's yourself, and it's also the sense of in-betweenness that is in Georgia for many decades now, especially in the last 40 years. We see this demonstration again, and it's the fourth time, at least in my lifetime, that I see this. And this is this ongoing cycle that didn't reach its resolution. Very unfortunately. We don't really know where it's going to resurface next time, and in what way it will be resolved.
And the topic we discussed was the security. The state security.
Which is also something that we wanted to talk about. And when we think about security and the concept of security, this starts with Cicero, a Roman writer who thought and conceptualized security as being safe and being kind of able to face your anxiety about the future. And this is something that's different from the way we understand security now. It's internal kind of way of prevent bad things happening to you instead of fighting against something. So this is, when we think about security as we understand it today, it comes from British historian of 17th century, Hobbes, who conceptualized this idea of Leviathan, the state who provides the security for the citizens, who creates kind of stable base from which we can kind of continue our lives as we know it. But now in this changing context of all these global issues that we're facing as a global society, I'm wondering, when you think about security, what specific element of it is most important to you as you are thinking about this show? Was it personal security? Was it state-based security? Was it this kind of hybrid nature of this term as we face this kind of changes?
Yeah, so I found it fascinating in our common title. So we worked, we had this thing about grades and borders and windows and these common themes. What I found fascinating by your title, Patterns of Insecurity. So this security and insecurity, that all these borders and grades that are being built for security, everything can change like only within a moment. Like also we were like initiating with the Ukraine full invasion, for example. In the West, we suddenly woke up and thought, the East-West problem is here again, although it had been there all the time. But we thought it was solved or something.
Yes,
in a weird
because
dream.
we're still in the cycle.
So we are in this kind of safe situation here in the West, we think, but it can change every moment. Also our system, we see our democracy is under attack. So everything can change every moment. So then, but we are as visual artists not directly working with these political themes, but it comes in always. And how it comes in, this is what we were interested in. So we didn't grasp it completely that it was about security or observation or whatever, but it's rather about freedom and individuality or states or like the collective and the personal. So it was more about images that we collected and shared. Like for example in Tbilisi, when I came there, of course I was struck because I work with windows a lot. I was struck by these window grills, that were like everything was kind of barricaded, like closed off, but with these transparent grills. Because of the 90s, you said, because of crime, but I also thought it was interesting that it was also created sometimes the balconies were closed off, so they were almost like transparent walls, so you could still see into the private homes. So
but you cannot intrude in it.
You cannot intrude, but they could also share something like almost like an open space in the street. So whereas in former days they were like speak to people from the balconies or share the public notion. It was something about can we participate still in the public? Are we participating in the public space, or are they only seeing us? So what is it about participation?
But this is also the inversion of private versus individual, right? I mean, individual versus public, which is so interesting when you think about the Soviet time, right? When individuality was pretty much prosecuted, and it was something that was discouraged. And instead of that, we had society back then had collective values, and collective as the maker. There was no individual. So, how do you think this has changed since you also run a collective, right? In Amsterdam. How do you think? What's the agents of an artist in this new kind of society?
I think I would start first with kind of adding a little bit to Sabine's answer. That I think it was very interesting, and that's an experience that I have, and I guess I build on, is when the state, like what you said, the security that the state provides, which was pseudo-security that we lived in during the Soviet Union, collapsed, and then actually people had to individually extend, but at the same time protect themselves. And that's why Tbilisi and Georgia, but Tbilisi very clearly because a lot of people moved also to Tbilisi because the economy was running there. That it was almost like you could see how individual people started to express themselves through all those ad hoc structures to protect, to extend, to privatize, and in a way city became like some kind of an organism. And that's the city where I grew up, and that very much affected me, which was almost like, it was not a postmodernist way, it was basically something else. And for me, when I moved to the West, and I was very young, I was 18, 19, and I had to somehow really invent myself, because they told me in the Linfield Academy, forget your past, you can start from zero, come on, like a zero gravity. So in a way, for me, it took some years to understand what's my legacy, where I come from, what do I want. So in a way, Artist Initiative, now I'm kind of making such a round, which I was founded after I graduated Linfield, was almost this kind of urge to create my own niche for certain questions and or forming certain questions that were relevant for me, so what I could contribute. And in a way it was an independent zone, and I was together with my other members of the group, which was very interestingly, almost no Dutch. They were like Israel, Serbia, Greek, Polish. We
So
had this
not even Eastern European, it was
mixed. It was mixed from Lebanon, Armenia, and somehow we all had this kind of urgency to have this place to talk and to discuss, because somehow we had to also address things that were not present in the West, but we were present, and we embodied all those things that actually formed us and shaped us, and we really very much wanted to find a way how to talk about it. Not in an institutional way when it happens, a curatorial exhibition about someone, but rather this kind of very personal, and that's where the artist initiative kind of was born. So it was really an initiative from the scratch, and working during the night times in the club, or cooking and supporting and but very important experience.
Sabine, would you like to add something to this?
Yeah, for me it's actually new to work in a collaborative situation. So also when we were in Tbilisi, everybody had her own space. Somehow we only collaborate in the middle, and I think here it comes out really well. This is the first time that we really collaborated, I think, and it's really nice. I really appreciate it. And also with Stephanie, I have to say again, Stephanie provides and curates this space, and it's really well done. I'm always fascinated by these the possibilities to experiment. So I really had, through also my past and all this, what I've been doing in the past years, a lot of art and architecture projects, and before working, showing galleries or so, and all parallel, then I had this also wish to be able to just work about contents and experiments, what we want to do on an artistic level. And this is really nice to have this freedom here. So this is,
in a way, it works very well with our topic. That's something that also made me a little bit insecure, which was interesting because the topic was this idea of insecurity, and I felt extremely insecure, and somehow I felt that it was very honest. The process we had, almost like also a little insecurity between us, how we would work in the same space, which is normal, because it's like, okay, we are two people put together, and it's not that we have this long experience how to work together. So in a way, it was a very interesting process, how the entire work was shaped, and also how our relationship in the space. And somehow the space itself offers this very nice atmosphere, very different,
So
which also has the layers of its own past.
Yes, and as I know, Stefan, for example, leaves the element from previous shows on the walls that are still visible. That's one thing that stood out to me. And the second one, of course, that we're still on the territory of former East Berlin, and how it corresponds to the first iteration of this exhibition being in Tbilisi. That was also part of the Soviet bloc, of course. So how do these two pasts of Georgia and Germany kind of shows up in this exhibition? It's very interesting. This collective, the question of collaboration in historical terms is kind of, it's fascinating. Is it this?
Because in a way it would be true. I would avoid interpreting my own work because it's something that maybe public has to see, but we can speak of maybe our intentions or like what we,
You're talking about the space. I wanted to add, it came to us just like a present also. The arcade space we proposed to do, the collaboration between Kunsthalle, Nina Chkareuli-Mdivani, and Art Week, what brought us in this space. In Tbilisi, that was 5 meters tall and was this old bourgeois pre-Soviet Union space, and before Soviet Union remained in the same time, like past the Soviet Union is still there, and it's funny. And here is this post-GDR space that is ripped open,
very
postmodernist, but also temporary. So this temporality is already visible already,
But I think what connects us both as well is that we very much take into account the space, the architecture,
and you change it.
And not only change it, but it becomes almost part of the because both works were made for this specific space. The same way in Tbilisi, both works were made for that space. On one hand, it's a very, not economical or not commercially, not in terms of talking about, being artists as a commercial, to survive. In a way, we are both in this very idealistic, almost doing things from scratch and not thinking pragmatically, okay, what we're going to do now with this huge metal that's over there in Tbilisi. But in that sense, that's also something that we both share, and that's interesting for me, that space also brings an element. So it also influenced, for example, very much our both works, the same way it did there. Because that building also had a very interesting history. It was a huge building, like kind of French style, which was during the 37, around that time, when a lot of people were sent to, they were killed or sent to gulags, executed. They were basically, they lost their property, and this property was distributed to different small families. Each room was given to a person. So almost like in Russia they call it komunalkas, you know, this like Kabakov very well addresses. And so you have to imagine that you have this huge room which was divided into 3 parts. So gallery has only one part of the big room. So in a way you have this beautiful ceiling that has a wall, and you can see that there is another part missing. So for example, it's very interesting already, because it's also about the idea of, you know, are you secure within your own walls? You're not. And then we come in with our installation where I connected, like we drove 2 rooms in a way, because I had this idea that, oh, part of this beautiful ceiling is there because the decor is showing that the other half is by the neighbor. And in a way that's interesting. And the same element was strong here, which was that the walls are already so interesting because they're almost like painterly, and they have all these traces of previous homes of like artists thinking where to show their works, was already so strong that in a way I had to think a lot, especially because of the fragility of the material, but also the transparency and the colors. And I was really puzzled. I said, can I win over, or can I have a dialogue? Because it's important to, on one hand, adjust like we Georgians have to, but on the other hand, also stay a little bit independent and show also your, you know, so it was almost this like insecure feeling I had, like which I had to share.
Can I click in this?
Yes.
You said that the other part was at the neighbor. This is how I had the feeling when I came to West Berlin. I grew up in South Germany, but my mother is from here, from Berlin, and my family is also divided, has been divided, and so the other part is at the neighbor. It's a good saying that we have this is exactly the feeling we had, of course, with a divided city, and these notions, you know, we also shared a lot our imagination always from the other side, and these from east and west.
Yeah.
No, that was
and doubling or tripling those memories also,
yeah.
Like, spaces, yeah? That's something that was very interesting to talk.
I would like, Sabine, to ask you about the specific work also, Valkabine, that we have here.
Yeah.
And also how it references this past that you're talking about, this creation of the wall and partitioning the space and constructing the space within it, as we see it here. Can you talk a little bit, how did you arrive at this approach and where did it start for you? Because throughout your long practice, you've been doing this consistently.
Yeah, I did it a lot in the 90s and beginning of 2000 to divide spaces, and that you had either you could only look into a space or see it later by walking around, or see only fragments of spaces and imagine it. And this probably could also function as a freestanding piece, but I made it specifically here to also interrupt this walkthrough that you can only see through, and then you had to go around and see it from the other side.
At the same time, it activates the space.
It activates the space, closes it off,
yes.
Makes it bigger somehow, but also is like the central thing is kind of the central is decentralized.
Mm-hmm.
That's what I'm always interested in, that there's no center somehow, and you have you have 2 solutions or 2 sides at least. You have to decide, or you have like always an alternative to look at, or the other side.
Yeah.
And this is what I'm interested in. And then also I connected it with the current possibility. It is actually a coincidence. And now we have next week the elections. I didn't think of the European elections also, but I thought about democracy in general, how it's from many sides now under attack.
Yes.
So there are countries who are trying to get into democracy, and there are countries who are trying to leave it, to take it down, dismantle it. And so this was also about building walls or looking through walls. So this is, for me, it is, of course, it's a grade, like the window grades in Tbilisi that talk about security, but it's also a transparent wall. So you have
a wall from here.
You have like a barrier, but you have it not. So you have like this both feeling of being excluded of something, but also trying to share but not reaching it, or maybe reaching it or not reaching it. So this is a Kafkaesque feeling.
Yes, so Kafka that happens today, and how also this year we'll have so many elections, including Georgia, including US and many other countries throughout the world, that will be affecting our future in many different ways, shaping it, which is politically significant time for Georgia, keeping in mind all the protests that have been going on in the last months.
So yeah, I'm sorry, I'm adding also this mirror was then a solution also, like it's like the table where you have to make the vote, and so you're looking into the mirror and you have to see what
You have to look into your...
face yourself.
You said something about the title, that in German,
Wahlkabine, yeah, it's like Wahl is choice, so it's more like the verb. It's not like you would have an election in English. It's more like the terminus, but it's what is the state terminus. But Wahlkabine is also making a choice. So yeah, cabin for making a choice.
Tamuna, let's talk a little bit about your series that are presented in the show, the patterns of insecurity. And also, we talked just about this just before the people came in, that the space affects the color scheme that you use for your works. So can you tell us a little bit how it changed from Georgia for this space and where it comes from for you and how it fits within your practice?
Generally the fabric is something that I adopted very much when I started to work more in Georgia. Because before in the Netherlands, it was much more firm and structural and wood and big installations. But
then you changed it to soft.
I changed to soft because it was very natural. Every topic I wanted to address, somehow it made me think of like things that are not firm. So they were not like one side or another. It's something that can be also, exactly. And that's one thing. And the second thing was always this idea of connections, because like it's something very much fascinating for me is that mostly in Georgia we don't have really like strong state institutions for visual arts or any other cultural, like there are few museums. But for an artist, when you are practicing your art and you want really to have some kind of a context, you have to almost create this context for yourself. And since in the Netherlands, I was very much busy with creating the context, running the project space, I realized that I need to create my own structure in order to build my work on. And in a way, that was affected by using fabric, which was also very economical, but at the same time also very fragile and almost like good material to hold the traces of things, became the material for me. And why I say about traces is because, again, I refer to this idea that since 90s, since all these institutions and structures collapsed, we hardly had anything. So in a way, a lot of artists are, I think, also very much relating to elements that are there scattered and trying to kind of
systematize them.
I don't know if it's systematized, but kind of link them and bring them together and create some kind of connections. And for me, it's always between history and reality. But it's also about like how the history is made, how the material is made, because in order to say something, you also need to have some background. And this background is almost like verbal. This has happened, but I don't have proof because no one has written about it. So what do I have to do? I almost have to create my own traces in order to prove what I'm saying. So in a way, the main focus for me became almost like creating or retracing the traces that were almost like embodied in me and many other people around me, related now to Georgia, which have lived and experienced certain things, basically. And that's how I appropriated the fabric. And regarding this particular series, of course, when we talked and when we discussed, like what Sabina said about the walls and the inside and outside, somehow for me it was multi-sided always. Yeah. It was never two sides, and in a way that also has to do with maybe, it could be very personal, but almost like when something explodes and things are like in the air, so they create many different ways of perceiving things. And since I always address counter histories or counter memories, which is interesting for me, like who narrates, like who are you, what's your story, what do you want to contribute, is it true, was it there, was it not there? In a way, for me it's important not to have only one point, though it does unite under. And so here particularly I was influenced, I mean, in Georgia, and this kind of second one, of course, as I mentioned, with Ukrainian invasion, and somehow I was very fascinated with women when they started to knit camouflage, which was in the newspapers a lot. They were making their own camouflages and contributing to the war. And I found it very interesting because I also worked a lot about women's topic, like about women's rights and topics, and also kind of
Early marriages, right? Was one
different
of the
things.
topics.
And so I felt like it's interesting because it's a structure which is super soft and fragile, but still it has this feeling that you accomplish certain protection or security, and it's almost like, you know, like it's almost like a wish to be secure, but at the same time it can be destroyed. And I thought like, now I'm not in a position, I cannot position myself as an Ukrainian woman, but I do have my own experiences of previous historical events in Georgia, and I understand, and so I addressed my own experience, and I thought I would like to make my own camouflage, and what would that be? So I suggested to Sabine that I would work with those ropes, and also ropes would help me to create a temporary structure where I could attach my small or big pieces in the space and work almost like a spider.
But you brought these ropes from Georgia.
They're the ropes from Georgia, and they're basically the ropes I used also in this space, and it's the first time I worked in this way, where actually the narrative is almost very abstract, because before I had more projects related to
also to archives that I wanted to ask you
yeah.
about in a little bit. But I wanted to ask Sabine if counter history in some way is an important factor you consider in some ways when you work within.
Yeah, I mean, this what I said is decentralization. It's a bit similar to what you're saying, that there is no, there is not only two sides, there are many multiple sides. Like also this looking through, this is transparency,
exactly,
looking through, that it's not opaque, it's not like there is not one story. Mm-hmm. There is like, you look through and you go to the origin of things. And then you create a simultaneity of visions.
Mm-hmm.
No, which is not, it's not a possibility. We were talking again how it's going on, like you live in New York, what's going in America on at the moment, that people have to position themselves all the time.
Well, this is ongoing.
This is another story, but it is always like, for me, it's like that this is, as you said, this fragility and of also perspective. You have these different cultural perspectives also that come in, which is like, I don't know, that's like, this is what I see similar.
But in terms of the transparency, do you think that the nature of it changed in a society, the value of it has changed? Because we have so fewer boundaries now. Through social media, we have so much information about anything and everyone, right? So do you think that this changed the meaning of your practice for you or for your viewers?
Not really. This is an interesting question, because I think it is. The question is our world more transparent? No, we're having all these. And what does transparency mean for us? It's not. You know, it's not. I think what I like is it's not only the see-through, but it's the simultaneously affect the meaning. Of course, you have simultaneously in the media, like everything at the same time. Yeah. And then this also could like
the cacophony of all the information.
This could represent it, of course, that you have this overlay of images, you know. So I work with transparent photography a lot, and I'm really fascinated how you created in these exhibitions, both exhibitions, the same understanding through only pattern, to more like looks like drawing, like a handmade thing, without using photography, without using through all these waste and, you know, image overload we are living in. You created a system for it, which works similar. That you have this simultaneously, and the simultaneous is more like also going through times, I think. It's not like, so then you think when you look through media, like when you think about media, what you see like whatever on the social media or in the news, for me it's more opaque. It's making things more opaque.
Murky, definitely.
Yeah.
So much of it that it's
because you can't go to the origin of things.
Right.
They can quote like Nabokov's idea of transparent things, you know. Where you go to the origin of the pencil, you know, like all these things you can see through and have these opposing perspective maybe in one image. That's what I'm interested in, and you don't have that in the media, I think, through the media. So maybe it's challenged even more for us, I think.
Tamuna, let's go back to your work on the archive, because I know that this was important for you in your previous projects, and you know, Tbilisi has a fascinating history with archive, and Georgia in general, and the archives, they're not unfortunately in that seamless state that we should have them probably. And you also worked in Berlin in archives, as you mentioned before. So can you tell us a little bit more about those projects and how they have affected your vision or understanding of urban biographies of these two cities that you inhabit?
So I had a residency in 2016 in Berlin, and it was an interesting experience for me because in a way that gave me an opportunity after going back also to Georgia to look at things from kind of different perspectives. And somehow I think Berlin is one of the cities where somehow I feel like, okay, I could be relating to certain historical traces here, rather more than in the Netherlands, for example. And that was also interesting.
Why do you think Berlin triggers that reaction for you?
Simply because I think, I mean, it's also a geographical thing, simply because in the Netherlands things cannot be so easily maintained. And here things are like those, I mean, it's very obvious the historical layers have been preserved, and it's almost like a city museum. And it's something that, for example, in Georgia, in the Netherlands, I mean, due to also how you can maintain things, because it's a different geographical territory. But in Georgia, for example, we fight Soviet past. So it's not about
it.
Yes, which means that it's just simply erased without questioning or addressing why. For example, if there was no de-Stalinization, so there was no addressing of what is good and what is bad. So they simply want to remove, they want to erase it, and with it a lot of things were also gone. So in a way, part of our experiences or part of our memories are also erased. And for me, that was one of the triggers where I thought like, yes, I didn't live deep in the Soviet Union, but whatever I've experienced and after effects of it, somehow I need those buildings. I need those symbols.
To help understand that part of your identity.
And if we know how to address them properly, then maybe we shouldn't be so much afraid of it. And that's a lot of post-Soviet countries have this.
Yes,
in Georgia
it's definitely not unique to Georgia, but this is the system, unfortunately, and this avoidance that I believe leads us back to this kind of reliving this past in painful ways in some ways.
Yes.
And we see it again now.
Yes, which doesn't mean that it doesn't happen in Germany or in other countries.
It's not.
But I'm sure there are much more discussions around it, and of course you can't save everything. But there is no discussion. I think all the politicians from all the parties agree that Soviet past is just
better not addressed because it's too complicated.
And for me, it was not necessarily only Soviet, but of course it was very much about myself. And I think that that's something I don't know, it's my choice, I guess. But somehow I always like to address things through me. And because I think it's the most honest. And I'm also not the person who sits and reads a lot of historical books or stuff, which is not my strongest capacity. But I do trust my own guts, and I think that as much as I experience, I can talk only through that. So it's always about through personal. And the archive was the same. Somehow I was very much interested in not state archives or things that have been already prepared for us, but rather things from personality, like from individuals that could be collected.